The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop outside the saloon in Globe, Arizona, and Josephine Parker pressed her gloved hand against the dusty window, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She had traveled nearly 2,000 miles from Boston to meet the man who would become her husband, a rancher named Harrison Tucker, who had written her the most beautiful letters over the past 6 months. His words had painted pictures of sunsets over copper-red mountains, of a ranch house with a porch swing where they could sit together in the evenings, of a life filled with simple pleasures and honest work. She had fallen in love with his words first, then with the idea of him, and now she was about to meet the reality. The driver yanked open the door and offered his weathered hand to help her down. Josephine gathered her traveling skirts, stepped onto the dusty street, and immediately felt the September heat of 1882 wrap around her like a wool blanket. Boston had been cooling into autumn when she left, but here in the Arizona Territory, summer still held the land in its fierce grip. She smoothed her dark blue traveling dress and adjusted her bonnet, aware that every eye on the street had turned to watch the newcomer. A few rough-looking miners stood outside the saloon, their curious gazes making her skin prickle. A woman in a faded calico dress paused in sweeping her porch to stare. Globe was clearly not accustomed to well-dressed Eastern ladies arriving on the afternoon stage. Josephine scanned the faces of the men nearby, searching for someone who might match the description Harrison had given in his letters. Tall, he had written, strong from working the land, dark hair, a scar on his left hand from a branding iron accident. She saw no one who fit that description among the onlookers. Her stomach twisted with anxiety. What if he had changed his mind? What if he took one look at her and decided she was not what he wanted? Then she heard boots on the wooden walkway, heavy and purposeful, and she turned. The man walking toward her was enormous. Not just tall, but broad across the shoulders in a way that made him seem like he could block out the sun. His face was weathered and hard, with a thick beard that covered most of his features, and a scar that ran from his eyebrow down his cheek, disappearing into the dark hair on his jaw. His hat was pulled low, shadowing his eyes, but she could feel the intensity of his gaze even from 20 feet away. He wore dusty work clothes, leather chaps over worn denim, and a gun belt slung low on his hips. He looked dangerous. He looked like every warning her mother had ever given her about the wild frontier had taken human form and was walking straight toward her. This could not be Harrison. Please, God, let this not be Harrison. But he was coming directly to her, his eyes never leaving her face, and Josephine felt the blood drain from her head. The street tilted sideways. The hot Arizona sun suddenly felt very far away, and the last thing she heard before darkness took her was the driver shouting, "Madam, madam, are you all right?" When consciousness returned, she was being carried. Strong arms held her against a chest that felt like solid oak, and she could smell leather, sweat, and something else, something that might have been soap or shaving cream. She heard a low voice, rough as gravel but somehow gentle, speaking close to her ear. "I have got you. Do not be afraid." "I will be gentle, I promise." Josephine's eyes fluttered open. She found herself looking up at the scarred face of the giant man, and this close she could see his eyes. They were gray, like a winter sky, and filled with concern. His beard could not quite hide the worried set of his mouth. He was carrying her like she weighed nothing, moving with surprising grace for such a large man. "Put me down," she whispered, mortified. "Please, I can walk." "You fainted dead away," he said, not slowing his stride. "I am taking you somewhere you can sit proper. The doctor's office is just up here." "Are you," she had to pause to swallow against her dry throat, "are you Harrison Tucker?" Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of pain or maybe regret. "Yes, madam, I reckon I am not what you were expecting." That was the understatement of the century, but Josephine could not find the words to respond. He carried her up the steps to a small building with a painted sign that read Dr. Samuel Chen, physician and surgeon, and shouldered through the door with practiced ease. A slight Chinese man in a clean white shirt looked up from a desk covered in papers and immediately rose to his feet. "Mr. Tucker, what has happened?" "New lady in town took one look at me and swooned," Harrison said, and Josephine heard something that might have been humor in his voice, though it had a bitter edge. "Figured you should check her over, make sure she did not hurt herself falling." "Set her on the examination table there," Dr. Chen said, gesturing to a clean surface covered with fresh linen. Harrison moved with surprising care, setting Josephine down as gently as if she were made of glass. His hands lingered for just a moment, steadying her, and then he stepped back quickly, as though afraid his touch might offend her. Dr. Chen brought her a cup of water, which she accepted gratefully. Her head was clearing, but the embarrassment was only growing stronger. What kind of first impression had she made, fainting like some delicate flower? She was made of sterner stuff than that. She had left everything she knew to come west, had endured the rough journey across the country, had faced the uncertainty of marrying a stranger. She was not the type to swoon. Except she had, right there in the street in front of half the town. "How are you feeling, miss?" Dr. Chen asked gently, his English perfect despite the slight accent that suggested he had been born elsewhere. "Any pain, dizziness still?" "I am fine," Josephine said, forcing strength into her voice. "It was just the heat, I think, and the journey. I am not hurt." Dr. Chen checked her pupils, felt her pulse, and asked her several questions about her health. Harrison stood near the door, his hat now in his hands, watching with an expression she could not quite read. In the better light of the doctor's office, she could see him more clearly. The scar on his face was old, long-healed. His beard was neatly trimmed, not wild like she had first thought. His clothes were worn but clean. His hands, holding his hat, were indeed scarred, marked by hard work and old injuries. They were the hands of a man who did not shy away from difficult tasks. "She needs rest, water, and food," Dr. Chen pronounced. "The stagecoach journey is very hard, especially for someone not used to this climate." "You are from back east, yes, Boston," Josephine confirmed. "Very different from here," the doctor said with a slight smile. "You must take time to adjust. Mr. Tucker, you will see she gets proper rest." Harrison's jaw tightened. "Doc, I cannot exactly take her to my place if she is not comfortable with the arrangement. Maybe she would rather stay at the boarding house." Josephine looked between the two men, suddenly understanding. Harrison thought she was going to refuse to marry him. He thought her fainting had been horror at his appearance, that she would take one look at him and run back to Boston on the next stage. And he was not entirely wrong, was he? She had been afraid when she saw him. His size, his scars, the gun on his hip, all of it had triggered every fear she had been trying to ignore for the past 6 months. But she had not come all this way to turn coward now. "Mr. Tucker," she said, her voice steady despite the nervousness fluttering in her chest, "I apologize for my reaction. You are right. You are not what I was expecting, but that is not your fault. I should not have made assumptions based on letters alone. If your offer of marriage still stands, I am willing to honor the agreement we made." Harrison's gray eyes widened slightly. "You do not have to do anything you do not want to do, Miss Parker. I will pay for a room at the boarding house and your ticket back east if that is what you choose." "No hard feelings." "That is very generous," Josephine said, sitting up straighter despite the lingering dizziness. "But I am not in the habit of breaking my word. We had an arrangement. I would like to proceed if you are still willing." For a long moment, Harrison just looked at her, and she could not decipher what was happening behind those winter-gray eyes. Then he nodded just once. "All right then. But we will do this proper. You will stay at the boarding house tonight. Tomorrow, if you still feel the same way, we can see the preacher. That gives you time to be sure." "That is fair," Josephine agreed, relief and anxiety warring inside her. Harrison paid Dr. Chen and collected Josephine's trunk from the stage depot. He carried it easily, despite its considerable weight, and led her down the dusty street to a 2-story building with a sign that read, "Mrs. Sullivan's Boarding House." A plump woman with iron-gray hair came bustling out when they entered, her sharp eyes taking in Josephine's fine dress and pale face. "Harrison Tucker, what have you dragged in here?" she demanded, but there was affection in her tone. "My bride-to-be, Mrs. Sullivan. Miss Josephine Parker from Boston. She needs a room for tonight and some decent food if you have got it." Mrs. Sullivan's entire demeanor changed. Her face broke into a wide smile and she clasped her hands together. "A bride? Oh, Harrison, you finally did it. Come in, dear, come in. You look exhausted. When did you last eat? I have got stew on the stove and fresh bread just out of the oven." The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Mrs. Sullivan showed Josephine to a clean, simple room on the second floor, helped her out of her dusty traveling clothes and into a fresh dress, and then practically force-fed her 2 bowls of hearty stew and 3 slices of bread with butter. Harrison sat at the kitchen table, eating his own meal in silence, speaking only when directly addressed. Josephine noticed how Mrs. Sullivan treated him with easy familiarity, teasing him gently about finally settling down, asking about his ranch, mentioning neighbors and townsfolk with the assumption that Josephine would soon know them all. When the meal was finished, Harrison stood and retrieved his hat. "I will be back tomorrow morning, Miss Parker. 9 o'clock if that suits you. That gives you the evening and night to think things over." 9 o'clock will be fine," Josephine said. He nodded to her, thanked Mrs. Sullivan for the meal and left. Through the window, Josephine watched him walk down the street, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the setting sun. He moved like a man used to being alone, she thought. Like a man who did not expect much from the world. Mrs. Sullivan came to stand beside her. "You could do worse, dear. I know Harrison looks a bit rough, but he is one of the good ones. Had some hard luck in his life, that is all. Lost his parents when he was barely 16, raised his younger sister on his own until she got married and moved to California. Built that ranch from nothing. Never causes trouble, always pays his debts. He does not talk much, but when he gives his word, you can trust it." "How did he get the scar?" Josephine asked quietly. Mrs. Sullivan sighed. "That happened about 5 years back. He was helping the sheriff track down some cattle rustlers. There was a fight, shots fired. Harrison took a bullet that was meant for the sheriff's deputy, nearly died from it. The scar on his face is from where he fell and hit a rock. The doctors said it was a miracle he survived at all." Josephine felt something twist in her chest. A hero's scar, then. Not a mark of violence, but of sacrifice. Why did he not mention that in his letters? She wondered aloud. "Probably because he does not think it matters," Mrs. Sullivan said. "Harrison is not one to brag or seek credit. He just does what needs doing and moves on." That night, lying in the narrow bed in the boarding house, Josephine stared at the ceiling and tried to organize her thoughts. She had expected someone ordinary, someone simple and kind. Instead, she had found someone complex, someone marked by life and hardship. Harrison Tucker was not the comfortable choice. He was not easy or familiar, but he had carried her with gentleness despite his size and strength. He had given her an escape route, even though it must have cost him pride to do so. He had promised to be gentle. She believed him. The next morning, she woke early and dressed in her best gown, a deep green silk that brought out the gold flecks in her hazel eyes. She arranged her auburn hair carefully, pinning it up in a style that was fashionable but not overly elaborate. When she looked at herself in the small mirror, she saw a woman who looked far more confident than she felt. At precisely 9 o'clock, she heard boots on the stairs and then a knock on her door. When she opened it, Harrison stood there in clean clothes, his beard freshly trimmed, his hat in his hands. He had clearly made an effort, and that touched her more than she expected. "Miss Parker," he said formally. "Have you had time to think?" "I have," she said. "My answer is the same as yesterday. I will marry you, Mr. Tucker, if you will have me." Something like relief flickered across his face. "Then let us go see the preacher." The church was a simple wooden structure at the end of the main street. The preacher, Reverend Matthews, was a kindly man in his 60s who seemed delighted to perform a wedding on such short notice. Mrs. Sullivan came to serve as witness, along with Dr. Chen and the sheriff, a grizzled man named Tom Walker, who clapped Harrison on the shoulder and told Josephine she was getting a good man. The ceremony was brief and simple. Harrison's voice was steady as he spoke his vows, his gray eyes serious and intent. Josephine's voice shook only slightly as she promised to love, honor, and cherish. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, Harrison leaned down and pressed a chaste kiss to her forehead, his beard soft against her skin. "Thank you," he whispered, so quietly only she could hear. They signed the register, accepted congratulations from the small gathering, and then Harrison helped her up onto a wagon that waited outside. Her trunk was already loaded in the back, along with supplies he had apparently purchased that morning. "The ranch is about an hour north of town," he explained as he took up the reins. "It is not fancy, but it is solid. I have got cattle, some horses, chickens, a good well for water. I built the house myself 5 years back." As they drove out of Globe, following a rough track that led into the hills, Josephine tried to take in everything at once. The landscape was harsh and beautiful, all red rock and scattered juniper trees, mountains rising in the distance. The sky was impossibly blue, stretching from horizon to horizon without a cloud in sight. It was nothing like Boston, with its cobblestone streets and brick buildings and the ocean always nearby. This was a different world entirely. "You miss it?" Harrison asked suddenly. "The East?" "I have not had time to miss it yet," Josephine said honestly. "Ask me again in a few months." "Fair enough." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "I know this is not what you signed up for. The letters I wrote, they were true, but they probably did not give you the full picture. I am not good with words, and I am even worse at talking in person. I spend most of my time alone with the cattle and the land. I am probably going to be poor company compared to what you are used to." "Mr. Tucker," Josephine said, "I did not come here expecting a social whirlwind. I came here because I wanted a different life than the one I had in Boston. I wanted space and possibility and a chance to build something meaningful. Your letters suggested you wanted the same thing. Was I wrong?" "No," he said, and she heard the honesty in his voice. "That is exactly what I want. I just want to make sure you know what you are getting into." "I appreciate that," she said. "And I think, given that we are now married, you should call me Josephine, or Joe if you prefer. Miss Parker seems rather formal under the circumstances." The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile but close. "Josephine, then. You can call me Harrison, or Harry, which is what most folks use." "I like Harrison," she said. "It suits you." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the wagon creaking and rattling over the rough road. Josephine found herself watching Harrison's hands on the reins, noting the way he handled the horses with easy competence. His movements were efficient and sure, never wasted. She wondered what those hands would feel like and immediately felt her cheeks heat at the thought. They were married now. Tonight there would be expectations. The thought made her nervous and curious in equal measure. As if sensing her thoughts, Harrison cleared his throat. "I want you to know there is no rush on anything. You will have your own room until you are comfortable otherwise. I meant what I said. I will be gentle and I will be patient." Josephine felt a rush of gratitude and something else, something warmer. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means a great deal to me." The ranch, when they finally reached it, was better than she had expected. The house was a solid structure of wood and stone, with a covered porch that ran along the front and a stone chimney rising from one end. There was a barn nearby, a chicken coop, and several corrals where horses and cattle grazed. Everything looked well maintained and orderly, the work of someone who took pride in what he had built. Harrison helped her down from the wagon and carried her trunk inside. The interior of the house was simple but clean, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, a smaller room that appeared to be an office or study, and 2 bedrooms. The furniture was handmade but sturdy, the floors were swept, and there were even curtains on the windows, though they looked like they had been hung by someone with more practicality than aesthetic sense. "The bedroom on the right is yours," Harrison said, setting her trunk down. "I took the liberty of airing it out yesterday and putting fresh linens on the bed. There is a washstand with clean water, and if you need anything else, just let me know. I will be doing the evening chores, feeding the animals and such. That usually takes about 2 hours. When I come back in, I will make us some supper." "You cook?" Josephine asked, surprised. "Had to learn," he said with a shrug. "It is not fancy, but it is edible. Can you cook?" "Yes," Josephine said. "Quite well, actually. My mother insisted I learn even though we had a cook. She said a woman should know how to manage a household properly." "Then maybe you can teach me some things," Harrison said. "I am getting tired of my own cooking." After he left to tend to the animals, Josephine explored her new home more thoroughly. The bedroom he had given her was larger than the other, she noticed, with a window that looked out over the hills. The bed was a good size, the mattress appeared to be well made, and there was even a small rug on the floor. He had clearly given her the better room. She unpacked her trunk, hanging her dresses in the narrow wardrobe and arranging her personal items on the washstand. It felt strange to be doing this in a house that belonged to a man she had married hours ago, a man she barely knew. But it also felt right somehow. Like she was finally moving forward with her life instead of standing still. When Harrison returned, he found her in the kitchen, examining the supplies in the pantry. "I can make us something for supper," she offered, "if you do not mind me taking over your kitchen." "It is your kitchen too," he said, "and I would be grateful. I was planning on beans and bacon, which is what I eat most nights." Josephine made a simple but satisfying meal of pan-fried chicken, potatoes, and greens, using the supplies Harrison had on hand. She even managed to make a passable gravy, despite the limitations of the cook stove. They ate at the small table, the silence between them less awkward than it might have been. Harrison complimented the food sincerely, and Josephine found herself pleased by his appreciation. After the dishes were washed and put away, they sat on the porch and watched the sun set over the hills. The sky turned incredible shades of pink and orange and deep purple, colors that seemed impossible until you saw them with your own eyes. The air cooled quickly as darkness fell, and Josephine shivered despite the shawl she had wrapped around her shoulders. "You should go on to bed," Harrison said. "It has been a long day for you. I will be up for a while yet, Got some paperwork to do." Josephine wanted to protest, to stay and talk, to get to know this man who was now her husband. But exhaustion was pulling at her, and she knew he was right. "Good night, Harrison," she said softly. "Good night, Josephine." She lay in bed that night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch. The house creaked and settled. Animals called in the distance. And somewhere in the other room she could hear Harrison moving around, the scratch of a pen on paper, the soft thud of a book being set down. She fell asleep to those sounds, feeling safer than she had expected to feel in this strange new place. The days that followed developed into a pattern. Harrison woke before dawn to tend to the animals and work the ranch. Josephine woke later and prepared breakfast, which they ate together before Harrison went back outside. She spent her days learning the rhythms of ranch life, tending the vegetable garden she found behind the house, caring for the chickens and managing the household. It was hard work, harder than anything she had done in Boston, but it was also satisfying in a way she had not anticipated. Harrison was true to his word about patience. He treated her with unfailing courtesy, never presuming, never pushing. They were like two strangers learning to share a space, careful and polite. But slowly, gradually, they began to relax around each other. She learned that he took his coffee black and strong, that he had a habit of running his hand through his hair when he was thinking, that he read books in the evening, surprising her with the breadth of his interests. He had books on animal husbandry and ranching, but also poetry and philosophy and history. He was self-educated, he explained, having had little formal schooling. He learned that she sang while she worked, that she had a talent for mending and could repair torn clothing almost invisibly, that she missed the ocean but was beginning to love the mountains. She told him about Boston, about her family, about why she had chosen to come west. "My father died 3 years ago," she explained one evening as they sat on the porch after supper. "He left debts that we did not know about. My mother and I lost our home. We moved in with my aunt, who made it very clear we were a burden. I was expected to marry my cousin, a man twice my age who drank too much and had wandering hands. When I refused, my aunt told me I would have to find my own way. I saw an advertisement for mail-order brides, and it seemed like an answer to prayer." Harrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I am glad you refused your cousin, and I am glad you answered my advertisement. I know this is not an easy life, but I will do my best to make sure you never regret coming here." 3 weeks after their wedding, things began to shift. Josephine had been gathering eggs one morning when she heard shouting from the direction of the barn. She dropped the basket and ran, her heart pounding, and found Harrison struggling with a horse in the corral. The animal was wild-eyed and panicking, and as Josephine watched, it reared up and struck out with its hooves. Harrison dodged, but not quite fast enough. A hoof caught him on the shoulder and he went down hard. Josephine did not think. She climbed the fence and ran into the corral, positioning herself between Harrison and the horse. "Easy," she said in a firm, calm voice. "Easy now. Nobody is going to hurt you." The horse tossed its head, nostrils flaring, but something in Josephine's voice or manner seemed to reach it. She kept talking, kept her movements slow and steady, and gradually the horse calmed. When it was standing still, breathing hard but no longer panicking, she slowly backed away toward Harrison. He was sitting up, holding his shoulder, his face pale beneath his beard. "That was foolish," he said through gritted teeth. "That horse could have killed you." "You are welcome," Josephine said tartly, kneeling beside him. "Can you stand?" Together they made it out of the corral and into the house. Josephine helped him remove his shirt, trying not to stare at the expanse of his chest and the muscles in his arms. There was already a dark bruise forming on his shoulder, but nothing appeared to be broken. She made a cold compress and insisted he sit still while she tended to him. "Where did you learn to handle horses like that?" Harrison asked, watching her with something like wonder in his gray eyes. "My father kept horses," Josephine said. "Before we lost everything, we had a small stable. I spent more time with the horses than I did with people, if I am honest. I always understood them better." "You are full of surprises," Harrison said softly. That night, something changed between them. Perhaps it was the fear they had both felt, or the way they had each acted without thinking to protect the other. Whatever it was, the careful politeness that had characterized their interactions began to give way to something warmer, more genuine. A few days later, Harrison asked her to ride out with him to check on the cattle in the north pasture. Josephine had not been on a horse since arriving in Arizona, and she was surprised by how much she had missed it. Harrison saddled a gentle mare for her, and they rode out together into the hills. It was a beautiful day, clear and warm but not oppressively hot. They found the cattle grazing peacefully, all accounted for. On the way back, they stopped beside a small stream, letting the horses drink while they rested in the shade of a cottonwood tree. "I have been thinking," Harrison said, his voice hesitant, "about something I wanted to say to you." Josephine looked at him, waiting. "You have been here almost a month now," he continued, "and you have not complained once. Not about the work, not about the isolation, not about me. You have taken to ranch life like you were born to it. I just wanted you to know that I see that. I appreciate it. You are more than I had any right to hope for." Josephine felt warmth spread through her chest. "I am happy here," she said, and realized as she spoke that it was true. "I was not sure I would be, but I am. The work is hard, but it is honest. The land is harsh, but it is beautiful. And you," she paused, suddenly brave, "you are a good man, Harrison Tucker, better than you give yourself credit for." He looked at her with those winter gray eyes, and something passed between them, something electric and powerful. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, he leaned toward her. When his lips met hers, it was gentle at first, questioning. But when she responded, when she reached up to touch his bearded cheek, the kiss deepened into something that made her heart race and her breath catch. When they finally pulled apart, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted. "So have I," Josephine whispered back. From that day forward, everything was different. They were no longer two strangers sharing a house. They were partners, a team, working together to build a life. Harrison began teaching Josephine the more complex aspects of ranching, how to read the land and the weather, how to handle cattle, how to track and hunt. She proved an eager and capable student. In turn, she taught him to cook properly, to mend his own clothes, to find beauty in small domestic pleasures he had long neglected. And at night, when the work was done and the house was quiet, they would sit together on the porch or in front of the fire, talking or reading or simply being together. The physical side of their marriage developed slowly, naturally, with the same patience and gentleness Harrison had promised from the beginning. Josephine found that her initial fear had been baseless. For all his size and strength, Harrison was incredibly tender, always careful, always attentive to her comfort and pleasure. She was falling in love with him. She realized one morning as she watched him work with one of the horses. Really, truly in love, not the idealized notion she had built from letters, but something real and solid and deep. She loved his quiet competence, his dry humor, the way he treated all living things with respect. She loved the way he looked at her, like she was something precious. She loved his hands, scarred and strong, and the gentleness they were capable of. She loved him. One evening in early November, as they sat on the porch watching the stars come out, Josephine leaned against Harrison's shoulder and said, "I think I should write to my mother. Tell her I am well. Tell her about you. What will you tell her about me? Harrison asked, his arm coming around her to hold her close. That I married a giant of a man who scared me half to death when I first saw him, Josephine said with a smile. That he whispered he would be gentle and kept his promise. That he is the best man I have ever known, that I love him with all my heart. She felt Harrison's sharp intake of breath. You love me? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. I do, Josephine said, tilting her head back to look at him. I love you, Harrison Tucker. His arms tightened around her, and when he spoke, she heard the thickness of tears in his voice. I love you too, Joe. I have loved you since the day you stood up despite being afraid and said you would honor your word. You are the bravest, strongest, most amazing woman I have ever known. I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you. You already are, she whispered, and then he was kissing her, deep and passionate and full of promise. The winter that followed was harsh, with storms that swept down from the mountains and left the world buried in snow. But inside the ranch house, Harrison and Josephine were warm and happy. They worked together to keep the animals fed and safe, to maintain the property, to survive the difficult months. And when the work was done, they had each other, and that was enough. In the spring, Josephine discovered she was pregnant. Harrison received the news with a combination of joy and terror that would have been comical if it had not been so endearing. He immediately became even more protective, insisting she rest more, do less heavy work. She indulged him because she knew it came from love, but she also continued to work because the ranch required it, and because she was not about to spend months idle. Their son was born in late autumn of 1883, delivered by Dr. Chen, who came out from Globe for the occasion. They named him Jacob, after Harrison's father. He was a healthy, squalling infant with his mother's coloring and his father's sturdy build. Harrison held his son with the same careful gentleness he had always shown Josephine, his gray eyes wide with wonder and love. I cannot believe I get to have this, he said softly, looking from the baby to Josephine. A family, a real family. We built it together, Josephine said, exhausted but happy. We earned it. Life settled into a new rhythm after Jacob's arrival. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. Harrison's careful management and hard work paid off, and he was able to hire a hand to help with the heavier labor, giving him more time to spend with his growing family. Josephine discovered she had a talent for the business side of ranching, keeping the books and managing the accounts with an efficiency that impressed Harrison. They added onto the house, building another bedroom and expanding the kitchen. Josephine planted flowers around the porch, adding beauty to utility. They acquired a dog, a loyal cattle-dog mix who followed Harrison everywhere and tolerated Jacob's toddler attentions with patient good humor. 2 years after Jacob, they had a daughter, named Margaret after Josephine's mother. She was a tiny, delicate thing, completely unlike her sturdy brother, and Harrison was utterly besotted. Josephine often found him simply staring at his daughter while she slept, as if he could not quite believe she was real. The years passed, marked by the seasons and the rhythms of ranch life. Drought years and good years, hard winters and mild ones, losses and triumphs. Through it all, Harrison and Josephine faced everything together, their love deepening with each challenge they overcame. They became pillars of the Globe community. Harrison served as sheriff for a term when Tom Walker retired, though he was glad to hand the badge to someone else after a few years. Josephine started a school in town, teaching the children of miners and ranchers 3 days a week. They made friends, built connections, became part of the fabric of the territory. When Arizona became a state in 1912, they celebrated with the whole town. Jacob was grown by then, working the ranch with his father and courting a sweet girl from a neighboring property. Margaret was teaching at her mother's school, bright and educated and determined to make her mark on the world. Harrison and Josephine stood on their porch that February night, watching fireworks light up the sky over Globe, celebrating statehood. They were older now, marked by time and weather and life. Harrison's beard was more gray than dark, and Josephine had lines around her eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But when Harrison took her hand and squeezed it gently, she felt exactly as she had that day by the stream when he had kissed her for the first time. "You ever regret it?" Harrison asked softly. "Answering my advertisement, coming out here?" Josephine looked at him, at this man who had been a frightening stranger and had become the center of her world. She thought of everything they had built together, the life they had created from nothing but hope and hard work and love. "Not for a single moment," she said. "You promised me you would be gentle. You have been gentle and patient and kind and so much more than I ever dreamed of. You gave me a life, Harrison. A real life, full and rich and meaningful. How could I ever regret that?" He pulled her close, and she rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart. They stood like that for a long time, watching the celebrations, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built together. Jacob married his sweetheart that spring, and by Christmas of 1912, Harrison and Josephine became grandparents to a healthy grandson. They named him Harrison, after his grandfather, and the older Harrison wept openly when he held the baby for the first time. Josephine watched her husband cradle their grandchild with the same infinite gentleness he had shown when holding their own children, and her heart swelled with love for this man who had so much tenderness beneath his rough exterior. Margaret married 2 years later to a lawyer from Phoenix, a smart young man who treated her as an equal and supported her ambitions. She continued teaching even after marriage, breaking with tradition, but doing so with her parents' full support. Harrison had always told his daughter she could be anything she wanted, and he meant it. As Harrison and Josephine moved into their later years, the ranch continued to thrive under Jacob's management, though Harrison still worked alongside his son, refusing to fully retire. "I will rest when I am dead," he told Josephine whenever she suggested he slow down, but his tone was affectionate, and she knew better than to push. The work was part of who he was, as essential as breathing. They celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary in 1912, surrounded by family and friends. Mrs. Sullivan, now ancient and frail but still sharp as a tack, attended and told anyone who would listen that she had known from the beginning that Harrison and Josephine were meant for each other. Dr. Chen, retired but still active in the community, toasted their health and happiness. Even Reverend Matthews, now in his 90s, came to offer his blessings. At the end of the celebration, when everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, Harrison and Josephine sat on their porch, just as they had done countless times over the years. The porch swing he had promised in his very first letter now existed, handmade and sturdy, and they sat in it together, swaying gently in the cool evening air. "I have been thinking about those letters I wrote you," Harrison said, "before you came. I was so worried they were not good enough, that I would not be able to express what I meant. I almost did not send them at all." "I am very glad you did," Josephine said, squeezing his hand. "I wanted to tell you something I never managed to put into words back then," Harrison continued. "Something I have thought about over the years but never quite knew how to say." "What is it?" Josephine asked softly. "When I wrote those advertisements, when I sent out those letters, I was looking for someone to share the work with," Harrison said slowly. "Someone to help manage the ranch, to not be alone anymore. I thought that was what marriage would be, a practical arrangement. I never expected love. I did not think I was the kind of man who got that." He paused, and Josephine waited, knowing he needed time to find the words. "But you taught me different," he continued. "You taught me that love is not something you are given or not given based on what you deserve. It is something you build together, day by day, choice by choice. You chose me, even when I scared you. You kept choosing me every day through everything. And I chose you right back. We built this love, Joe. We made it real. And it is the greatest thing I have ever done." Tears slid down Josephine's cheeks. After 30 years, this man could still make her cry with the depth of his feeling. "I love you," she whispered. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Harrison said. "You are my heart, Joe. You always have been." They sat together on the swing, holding hands, watching the stars come out over the Arizona landscape they both loved. The air was cool and sweet, filled with the scent of the flowers Josephine had planted and the earth Harrison worked. In the distance, they could hear cattle lowing, horses moving in the corral, the normal sounds of ranch life. Inside the house, evidence of their children and grandchildren was everywhere, photographs on the walls, toys in the corners, the accumulation of a life fully lived. As the moon rose, casting silver light over the land, Harrison began to hum softly, a tune Josephine recognized from years ago. She joined in, and their voices, worn by age but still strong, rose together in the quiet night. They sang songs from their youth, songs their children had loved, songs they had learned over the years. They sang until their voices grew tired, and then they simply sat in comfortable silence, content in each other's presence. The years continued their inevitable march. More grandchildren came and then great-grandchildren. The ranch expanded and modernized, though it always retained the essential character Harrison had given it. Jacob proved a worthy steward of the land, and his children after him showed the same dedication. In 1920, Josephine celebrated her 62nd birthday surrounded by so much family that they had to hold the party outside. Harrison, now 68, watched the chaos with amused tolerance, his arm around his wife's waist. They had both slowed down considerably, their hair white, their movements careful, but the love between them burned as bright as ever. That night, after everyone had gone, Josephine found Harrison in his office, looking at an old photograph. It was from their wedding day, showing the two of them standing stiffly in front of the church. Harrison looked impossibly young despite his beard, and Josephine looked terrified but determined. "We have come a long way," she said softly, coming to stand beside him. "We have," Harrison agreed. "Sometimes I look at this picture and can barely remember being that man. I was so sure you would leave, so convinced I was not enough." "You were always enough," Josephine said firmly. "More than enough. You just needed someone to show you." Harrison set the photograph down and turned to face her fully. Even diminished by age, he was still an imposing figure, still the man who had made her faint all those years ago. But now she knew him completely, knew every scar and story, every fear and hope, every tender hidden place in his heart. "Dance with me," he said suddenly. "There is no music," Josephine protested, but she was already moving into his arms. "We will make our own," Harrison said, and began to hum the same tune he had sung on their anniversary years before. They danced slowly in the office, surrounded by the records of their life together, moving to music only they could hear. Josephine closed her eyes and let herself remember everything. The fear of that first meeting, the gentleness of his promise, the slow building of trust and then love, the years of work and joy and struggle, the family they had created, the life they had built. It was a good life, she thought. A very good life. The following spring, Harrison fell ill. It started as a cough that would not go away, progressed to weakness and fatigue. Dr. Chen's successor, a young woman who had trained back east, diagnosed pneumonia and did what she could, but Harrison's age worked against him. He spent weeks in bed, weak and feverish, while Josephine sat beside him and refused to leave. In his lucid moments, Harrison would reach for her hand and hold it tight. "I am not afraid," he told her. "I have lived more than I ever thought I would. I have loved and been loved. I am ready." "I am not ready," Josephine said fiercely. "I am not ready to let you go." "You are the strongest person I know," Harrison said softly. "You will be fine. You will have the family around you. You will not be alone." "I will be without you," Josephine said. "That is a kind of alone I never wanted to know." Harrison improved slightly over the next few weeks, enough to sit up and take solid food, enough to receive visits from his children and grandchildren. But they all knew he was not recovering, merely holding steady. He was tired. Josephine could see it. After 69 years of hard living, his body was ready to rest. One evening in May, as the sun set in a blaze of color that rivaled any they had seen, Harrison asked Josephine to help him out to the porch. She got Jacob to assist, and together they settled Harrison in his favorite chair, wrapped in blankets despite the warm evening. The whole family gathered, sensing something important was happening. They filled the porch and the yard, 3 generations of Tuckers, all of them bearing some mark of the man who sat quietly watching them. Harrison's eyes moved from face to face, and Josephine saw satisfaction there and peace. "I want to tell you all something," Harrison said, his voice weak but clear. "I was not supposed to have any of this. I was just a kid who lost everything trying to make something of nothing. The ranch, the family, all of it, I built it from dust and hope. But none of it would have mattered. None of it would have meant anything without your grandmother." He reached for Josephine's hand, and she gripped it tight, tears already streaming down her face. "She took a chance on a stranger," Harrison continued. "She came halfway across the country to marry a man she had never met. And when she saw me, saw all of this," he gestured vaguely at his scarred face, his large frame, "she fainted dead away. I thought that was the end before it started, but she got back up. She kept her word. And then she did something miraculous. She loved me. This fierce, brave, brilliant woman loved me, and because of that love I got all of you. Every single one of you is here because she chose not to run away, because she chose to stay, because she chose to build a life with me." The family was silent, many of them crying openly now. "Take care of each other," Harrison said. "Love each other fiercely, be brave like your grandmother, be gentle when you can, strong when you must. And remember that family is not just blood. It is choice. Choose each other every day. That is the secret to everything." As the sun finally slipped below the horizon, Harrison leaned back in his chair, still holding Josephine's hand. His breathing was labored but steady. The family stayed late into the evening, talking softly, sharing memories, saying their goodbyes. Harrison passed away peacefully 3 days later, with Josephine beside him, holding his hand just as she had held it through their entire life together. His last words were, "Thank you for choosing me." The funeral was the largest Globe had ever seen. People came from all over the territory to pay their respects to Harrison Tucker, the rancher who had built something from nothing, the man who had served his community with honor, the husband and father and grandfather who had loved his family with quiet devotion. They buried him on the ranch, on a hill overlooking the land he had worked for 50 years, under a sky as wide and blue as the one that had greeted Josephine when she first arrived. Josephine stood at the grave after everyone else had gone, looking at the simple headstone that bore her husband's name and the dates of his life. She thought about the promise he had made her that first day, when she had fainted at the sight of him and woken in his arms. "I will be gentle, I promise." He had kept that promise every day of their marriage, through good times and hard times, through joy and sorrow. He had been gentle with her heart, gentle with their children, gentle with the land and the animals and everyone he encountered. His sighs and scars had hidden the tenderness of his soul, but Josephine had been privileged to know it fully. "I love you," she whispered to the wind. "I will always love you." She continued living on the ranch, cared for by Jacob and his family who had moved into the main house. She remained active in the community, still teaching occasionally, still managing the business side of the ranch with her sharp mind. But everyone could see that something essential had gone out of her. She was present but distant, as if part of her was always somewhere else, with someone else. 2 years after Harrison's death, on a cool autumn evening that reminded her of the day they had first kissed by the stream, Josephine sat on the porch swing and closed her eyes. She was tired, so very tired. She missed Harrison with an ache that had never diminished. She missed his quiet presence, his gentle hands, his winter-gray eyes. She missed the way he said her name, the way he held her, the way he made her feel safe and cherished and loved. As the sun set in a blaze of color, Josephine felt a warmth surrounding her, a presence that was achingly familiar. She opened her eyes, and for just a moment, she could have sworn she saw Harrison standing at the edge of the porch, young and strong and smiling, his hand extended toward her. "I am coming," she whispered. "Wait for me just a little longer." Margaret found her the next morning, sitting peacefully in the swing, a slight smile on her face. She had passed quietly in the night, her heart simply deciding it was time to rest. They buried her next to Harrison on the hill, and on her headstone they carved the words she had lived by. She chose love. The ranch continued for generations after, passing down through the Tucker family, each generation adding their own mark while honoring the foundation that Harrison and Josephine had built. The story of how they met became family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren. How the mail-order bride had fainted when she saw the scarred, giant rancher. How he had carried her gently and promised to be gentle. How they had fallen in love despite all the reasons they should not have. How they had built an empire of love and family and hard work that lasted far beyond their own lives. And on quiet evenings, when the wind moved through the Arizona hills and the sun painted the sky in impossible colors, some of the Tucker descendants swore they could feel the presence of their ancestors, still together, still in love, still watching over the land and family they had created. Harrison and Josephine Tucker, whose love story began with fear and a promise and ended only when death could no longer keep them apart. The ranch stood as a monument to what they had built together, but the real legacy was in the family that filled it. Children who had been taught to be brave like Josephine and gentle like Harrison. Grandchildren who learned that love was a choice you made every day. Great-grandchildren who grew up knowing that family was the most important thing, that hard work mattered, that promises should be kept. Each generation carried forward the lessons of that first brave decision Josephine had made to step off the stagecoach in Globe, Arizona, and the gentle promise Harrison had whispered that changed both their lives forever. In the end, that was the true measure of their love. Not in the years they had together, though those were precious. Not in the ranch they built, though it was impressive. But in the ripples that spread outward from their choice to love each other, touching lives and shaping destinies for generations to come. They had been two lonely people who found each other across a continent, who built something real and lasting from nothing more than hope and determination, and eventually, deep and abiding love. And if love could be measured in legacy, in the lives touched and changed and made better. Then Harrison and Josephine Tucker had loved more truly and deeply than most people could even imagine. Their story was proof that the best things in life often come from the scariest moments, that promises kept can change everything, and that true love, real love, the kind that lasts, is built day by day through choice and commitment and gentle care. That was the story the Tucker family told, generation after generation, gathered on the porch of the ranch house that Harrison built and Josephine made a home. And every time the story was told, it ended the same way, with a reminder that love is not about perfection or appearances or easy beginnings. Love is about seeing past the scars to the soul beneath. Love is about keeping promises. Love is about choosing every day to be gentle and to stay. And that kind of love, the Tucker children learned, was the only kind worth having.